Hey, everybody, Chris Peters here, and welcome to Talking Hockey Sense. It's episode 90 of the podcast. Real excited to have you all here to get ready for back to school. My kids, I sent them off to school this morning, and we got a lot to talk about because college classes are beginning. The college hockey season is not that far away. We've got college football starting up soon, which is a great sign that hockey season is almost here on the college ranks. We've already got preseason games going on in junior hockey across the United States and Canada. Summer hockey's wrapping up now, and we're going to get those NHL training camps and everything. So everything's going to be happening very, very soon, which is obviously very exciting. This summer felt like it went really fast because there's been a lot of different things with the draft. And of course, we go right into the prospect season with the Holinka Gretzky Cup and the World Junior Summer Showcase. There's really no more breathing room anymore. We just get right into it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to continue this conversation we've been having in the last few weeks and start adding in some more elements. We're going to talk a little bit about the 2024 NHL Draft based on some of the questions I got from listeners today. Talk a little bit about what's coming up on FloHockey this season. We talked about a bit about it last week. Want to give you some more details about kind of things that are happening because there is so much that is going to be available to FloHockey subscribers this year that want to make sure that you're taking full advantage of that as a hockey fan. And then also, we're going to spend some time on college hockey, as I mentioned, and specifically these incoming freshman classes, because I think that that's one of the most fascinating elements of any college season is the new blood that comes in and the guys that are going to be taking the college ranks by storm. We saw last season, 2 freshmen were in the Hobie hat trick finalists, and Adam Fantilli and Logan Cooley. Both of them one-and-done players. They have moved on, but we will talk about the guys that are going to be coming in to replace players like Fantilli and Cooley here as we talk a little bit about some of the top recruiting classes across the country. Well, we've got a lot of very interesting topics to get into, but before we do that, I do want to remind you that you can subscribe to this podcast on your audio podcast apps of choice. You can also watch us on YouTube. You can also watch on FloHockey.tv or the Flow Sports app. You can watch us on your TV, on your computer, on your phone, wherever you want to. We are available to you very many ways. And also, if you are on any of those podcast apps, go ahead and throw us a kind rating and review so that we can continue to get the word out about this podcast. Not a lot of hockey podcasts are running in the summer, but we are going even on an abbreviated schedule. And so hopefully we're providing some hockey in this otherwise hockey desert of a time period. It really seems like late August and into early September is when things are a little quieter, but they're really about to ramp up very soon. So it's back to school time. College campuses everywhere are starting their classes. They're getting going. And that means the new freshmen are there. And that also means that college hockey programs are welcoming their freshman classes to campus, or their new recruits, the guys that they spent a lot of time waiting for and looking forward to. And we're going to focus on some of the top recruiting classes because I really do think that this has been a year where there are some really special classes. And it seems like, at least at this early stage, many of them, or at least the top 2 that we're going to talk about to start things off, are on the East Coast and they are in the city of Boston. Boy, what a resurgence it should be for the Boston College Eagles, and Boston University has to be feeling very good about their chances of taking things even a step further this year after reaching the Frozen Four last season. But we're going to start it off with Boston College. I really do think that this is the number 1 recruiting class in the country because they brought in one of the best lines we've ever seen in junior hockey. Will Smith, Ryan Leonard, Gabe Perreault. You can put those 3 guys on your line. You've already got Cutter Gauthier to lead your offense, but now you've got this group of players that you expect to be able to produce immediately, coming in with built-in chemistry and guys that produced at an extremely high level. All 3 at the National Under-18 team last year, all 3 gold medalists at the World Under-18 Championship. Will Smith nearly set a record for points there with 20 in the tournament. Ryan Leonard scored the game-winning goal, and then Gabe Perreault set the all-time single-season record for points scored at the NTDP with 132 last year for the Under-18 team. That is just 3 forwards, and that doesn't even cover the entire class. They also bring in Jacob Fowler from the Youngstown Phantoms. Fowler was the USHL Goaltender of the Year, the USHL Clark Cup Playoffs MVP, won the Clark Cup, won the World Junior A Challenge with Team USA earlier in the fall, and he was USA Hockey's Goalie of the Year. That's who you get to come in to be your number one goaltender. He's a candidate to play for the U.S. national junior team this year, and he is a very accomplished goalie. He was previously committed to Clarkson. Things kind of snowballed for him, and a lot of teams started getting more interested, and then the opportunity at Boston College opened up. He's a Florida native, so not necessarily the local connection, and he is now a Boston College Eagle and a Montreal Canadiens draft pick. And the other three guys that we mentioned, Will Smith, number 4 overall pick for the San Jose Sharks, Ryan Leonard, first rounder to the Washington Capitals, and Gabe Perreault, first rounder to the New York Rangers. So you got 3 first rounders on the line. You've got a goaltender, one of the top goalies selected in the last draft in Fowler by the Montreal Canadiens. And then you've also got some new blood on the back end as well. You've got guys like Drew Fortescue, drafted by the New York Rangers. Aaron Manishin, another guy that had a tremendous year at the National Team Development Program, a highly productive player. Going to be interested there. They also have Will Vogt, who is coming over from the NTDP. So they have a significant chunk of players from last year's U.S. Under-18 team that are coming in to support a team that already has a number of high-end players. But when you add those guys, we're talking about a major impact and a potential program-changing class. Now, we'll have to see how long the guys like Will Smith and Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard will be there. We expect that this is probably Cutter Gauthier's last year in college. He's a sophomore. You know, the Philadelphia Flyers were already interested in signing him. They're going to sign him probably at the end of this season. He's going to have a big World Junior Championship. I think he's going to have a tremendous college season. And teams are going to have such a hard time matching up against Boston College because it's like, all right, we got to stop Cutter Gauthier, and then we've got to stop this, this big line of freshmen that have this built-in chemistry. And you got a guy like Ryan Leonard who plays a more physical style but highly skilled. Two tremendous, elite playmakers in Will Smith and Gabe Perreault. Those are the guys that are going to be driving things for Boston College. So, Greg Brown has a chance to really make his stamp with this team, with the group that they have now. They have to feel like their contention window is open, even though they're going to be very young next year. They have to feel like they have a chance to really get back into the national conversation and be a team that is going to go on a bit of a run here. But if they're going to do it, they're going to have a big challenge ahead, and that is in the form of the Boston University Terriers. The Battle of Comm Ave is going to be fierce this year. It is also going to be a place where there is a lot of focus from NHL scouts. Boston University probably landed the guy that I think is the number one recruit coming in throughout the entire country, and that is Macklin Celebrini. USHL Forward of the Year, USHL Rookie of the Year, and USHL Player of the Year, all in one. And he played for the Chicago Steel last year, set the record for most points by an under-17 player. He's accelerated, so he's going to be young. He's expected to be the number one pick. One caveat to Celebrini joining the Terriers this year, it sounds like he is going to be on the shelf at the beginning of the season. We don't know yet. He did have off-season surgery. We don't know if he'll be ready to go in time to play for Boston University at the start of their season. We do have one of their early games this season, October 7th, against Bentley on FloHockey. We don't know if we'll see Macklin Celebrini, who we were able to watch on Flo all last year, as he just torched the USHL. But that's a significant player in the mix for BU that is going to make a significant difference for that program. But it's not just Celebrini. You also are bringing in Tom Willander, a top pick and one of the top defensemen selected in the NHL Draft, Vancouver Canucks prospect, highly mobile defenseman, decent offensively, not going to score a ton of points, I don't think, but a high-end defender and a guy that you're probably going to have for a year or two, maybe even 3, as he continues to develop and round out his game. It's going to be his first season in North America, played in Sweden last year, played at the U20 ranks. He was a great defenseman for them at the Under-18 World Championship, very nearly beat Will Smith and Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault. If you think there's any more fuel that Boston University needed, apparently not, because obviously Willander is going to be looking for some revenge on those guys, maybe in the Bean Pot or in the Hockey East playoffs or something like that. Beyond those guys, there's a number of players with significant USHL experience that are going to be interesting to kind of watch as they transition into here. And I think Shane LaChance is a guy who is, as an Edmonton Oilers draft pick, he was a central figure for the Youngstown Phantoms last year in their run to the Clark Cup playoffs. He's a big human. I mean, that is, having size up front can really help. He's a guy that will come in ready to make an impact on this team in a physical way. Jack Harvey, who had a very productive season for the Chicago Steel, another guy that, was coming in and could make a pretty significant impact going forward. And so there's more than that as well. I mean, they have a number of young players coming in. And you look at what they already have, and having Lane Hudson, who's one of the top returning defensemen for the entire NCAA, a guy that I think could be in the hunt for the Hobey Baker. You add a Macklin Celebrini, you add a Tom Willander to that mix, that's going to be a much better situation for the Terriers. I think there are going to be some questions they're going to still have to answer on the goaltending front. They lose Drew Comesso from last year's team. They got to try and replace that. I don't think that they have, that's a difference between them and BC, is that, I think the goaltending that is being brought in right now by BC and Jacob Fowler, that's a significant piece. They've got guys in every position, but having two cornerstone players like Celebrini and Willander, and then having some guys that are going to come in a little more ready, guys that played extra years of junior hockey like LaChance, that's really going to give you a great opportunity to have a really strong team. And I think BU is going to have a really talented group, and they're going to have some fifth-year seniors on their team as well, some guys that are taking that extra COVID year. They came close last year. They want to go all the way. Getting bounced by the University of Minnesota in the semifinals, that's a team that has to have a lot of belief. I think those two classes are far and away the best, but there are a number of other teams that I wanted to mention in this process, because I think you look at, Minnesota is going to have an interesting situation. They've got to replace Logan Cooley and Matt Nyes. That's significant in terms of what they have to replace offensively. I think it's more significant, however, what they have to replace on the back end. No Brock Faber, no Jackson Lacombe, no Ryan Johnson. It puts a lot of strain on guys like Mike Kester and others that are going to have to be the veterans there. Coming in this season, you're going to have Sam Renzel, who played for the Waterloo Blackhawks. He's a first-round draft pick of the Chicago Blackhawks. He's going to have to be a guy that steps in and makes a pretty immediate impact. He played an extra year of junior hockey to prepare for this opportunity to play for the University of Minnesota. He had to finish up his schooling, goes to Waterloo, and I thought he had a really good season, and he developed. He was decent in stretches at the World Junior Summer Showcase. He's got a chance to make that World Junior team. He has to step up and be an impact player for Minnesota. And then on top of that, they also have Oliver Moore. And Oliver Moore is coming into a situation where he would have probably been a number 2 center, maybe a number 3 center in the initial year, especially with Logan Cooley there. Cooley signs late with Arizona. That creates an opportunity for Oliver Moore to potentially play a bigger role more immediately. They still have Jimmy Snuggerud, who's returning to the team this year. Significant piece for their offensive attack. They need somebody that can keep up with him and also that can get him the puck. Oliver Moore is going to have to prove that he can be a bit more of a play-driving center. That's the question that we're going to have about him going forward. But I do think that he's going to play a significant role. They have other players coming in. Jimmy Clark is going to be added. Our own Ryan Sykes broke the story that Jimmy Clark will be coming in a year earlier than expected. Played for the Green Bay Gamblers last year. He's a Minnesota Wild draft pick, highly energetic player. Had a really good USHL season last year. Is that going to be enough? He's not coming in to replace Logan Cooley 1-for-1. I'll tell you that much. But he is going to be a guy that's going to provide some depth for them. And then they have a number of players that did decide to come back for an additional season, like Bryce Brodzinski, like Jackson Nelson. And then, mentioning guys like Kester and they have Pitlick, and they have a number of players that will be able to fill some of the gaps, but they're going to need these freshman guys to step up. They don't have a deep freshman class, but they have a good top end with Renzel and more. A couple other classes to talk about. I think one of the more intriguing and interesting classes, and this is both when you talk about including the freshmen they've added and the transfers that they've added, Michigan State is in a great position to make some noise this year. I think that of the Big Ten teams, they have one of the most intriguing recruiting classes. I think it's one of the deeper recruiting classes as well. And they've got some significant pieces, especially on the back end and at the goaltending position, that are going to make them take those steps under Adam Nightingale that we started to see them take last year. But now they're going to have even more high-end personnel. And that includes transfers like Red Savage, who played at Miami University, Detroit Red Wings prospect, and Isaac Howard, a first-round draft pick of the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's coming in, and Red Savage is an all-around player. Isaac Howard is a dynamic offensive talent, but you need to supplement that with a really strong recruiting class, and that is what Michigan has. The big splash came very late in the process. We've talked about it on here before. Artem Levshunov, who played for the Green Bay Gamblers last year, was one of the best rookie defensemen that we've seen in the USHL, period. I mean, you go back to Owen Power, you go back to guys that got picked in the first round, like Jordan Schmaltz, rather. Guys that had success. He had as much or more than those guys. Actually outproduced Owen Power in his draft -2 season or draft -1 season, and now he's going to Michigan State. We've actually got a question about Levshunov later that we'll talk a little bit more in depth about his transition from junior to college hockey. But that is a significant piece. And they already had a really good defenseman and second-round draft pick, Maxime Sturbach from the Sioux Falls Stampede. When we saw him internationally last year, playing at the World Juniors, playing at the World Under-18s, he played some of his best hockey on the biggest stages, and now he's going to have an opportunity to do that at the collegiate level. He's a mature defender. He's got some offensive capabilities. He's going to be able to play a two-way game. There should be a little bit of a transition, but that's going to be an important piece for them. They also have some of these guys that are kind of secondary prospects. A Tommy Monisto, who they got from Finland. We just saw him at the World Junior Summer Showcase. He can absolutely fly. He can absolutely score. Is he going to be able to do that at the collegiate level? He didn't have big numbers in Finland, but, in terms of his physical tools and his capabilities, that could be important for him. Owen Baker, who's a veteran NHL player coming in after a couple good years, will provide some secondary pieces. But I think the guy that's really, really important to whatever Michigan State is going to do this year is Trey Augustine, Detroit Red Wings draft pick, probably Team USA starting goalie at the World Junior Championship. That was a significant recruitment addition for Adam Nightingale, who did coach Augustine as an underager at last year's, 2 years ago at the World Under-18 Championship, where USA fell just short against Sweden. Augustine gets his revenge this last year. He was probably the single biggest reason USA won a gold medal. They did not play well in the gold medal game, and he kept them in that game the whole way and probably stole them that game, just as the year before the Swedish goalie Hugo Havelid stole the game from USA. We felt like Trey Augustine stepped up in that big way. He's a big game goaltender. He's calm. He's cool. He's mature. He's got great hockey sense. He's got good technique. He's just prepared, and I think that that's going to be a big factor. And Michigan State, to me, is going to be one of the most intriguing groups to watch throughout this season. A couple others that I did want to mention as well, and this isn't necessarily the ranking. We'll talk about recruiting classes. We'll dive in a little bit further, but these are the ones that I think are notable. A big recruiting class this year for UMass. I think we're starting to see the fruits of winning national championships, of getting a Cale Makar, into your program, getting a Mario Ferraro into your program, and watching those guys flourish into NHL players. Greg Carvel is now getting these really interesting pieces to their team, and they're coming from all over. They've really expanded their recruiting footprint to get more international players. And they did have some international players in some of their years of their most competitiveness, and obviously being a national champion right after Cale Makar leaves. But this year, I think one of the guys who might be one of the most underrated freshmen coming into college hockey this year is a Boston Bruins draft pick by the name of Dan Zlotmelis, and he is a really interesting player, Latvian. He's played at the U20 level. He has played at the World Championship level for Latvia, and he's played, significant European under-20 hockey throughout his career. That is a guy that I think comes in with a lot of experience that is going to help him be an instant impact player at UMass. That is one to watch for sure. Michael Hrabal, the goaltender from the Omaha Lancers, he was supposed to go back to the USHL last year. UMass had a spot open up. He's coming in now. So now that's a guy you need to make sure is getting some reps. Also, Jackson Irving, who is an experienced USHL goaltender, was another guy that they had in the mix there. Adar Suniev, who had a tremendously productive season in the BCHL. He got drafted. He's got size. He's got scoring ability. Nick Van Tassel, had another guy that got drafted in the NHL, played for the Green Bay Gamblers. Really interesting opportunity there for UMass. Also in Hockey East, I think Maine, under head coach Ben Barr, is about to bring in one of the best recruiting classes they've had. Now, a lot of that hinges on something that is yet to be finalized, and that is whether or not Artem Duda will become eligible to play for the University of Maine this year. I don't know how it's going to happen. We still haven't gotten word. He is not currently listed on the Maine roster as we record this podcast. But if they do get Duda eligible, and again, it's going to be difficult, but if they do, that is a game-changing defenseman. Highly mobile, really good offensively. He's an Arizona Coyotes draft pick. And one of the reasons why we're so intrigued by whether or not this is going to happen is because he did play in the KHL, which is, as we know, a professional league. Is there a way to recoup some eligibility? I don't know, but we're going to find out. But even if Duda doesn't play for them, they still have the Nadeau brothers from the Penticton V's last year, Bradley and Joshua, two incredibly explosive offensive players. Nadeau was Bradley was a first-round draft pick of the Carolina Hurricanes. They're not big guys, but they are absolutely dynamic. And I think that Nadeau could be, both of them could be a significant impact freshman duo for Maine. And so that is a very important team as well. A couple of the others that I'm looking at, I think Wisconsin's got a nice recruiting class under Mike Hastings. They didn't lose a lot of guys after Tony Granato was fired. And so they were able to maintain and add to their recruiting class. They also added significant transfers, 3 guys coming over from Minnesota State that are going to be, I think, really significant players, including Christian Fitzgerald, who I thought was one of the best freshmen in the CCHA last season. I think he'll be his skill set, his size, that's going to instantly translate as a sophomore. But they've got, big Brady Cleveland and Zachary Scholes, 2 guys that played for that under-18 team for a gold medal. Owen Mellenbacher, who had a really strong USHL season, a Detroit Red Wings draft pick. William Whitelaw, who was a dynamic player in the USHL last year and one of the most critical players to the Youngstown Phantoms championship run. Also had a great showing at the World Junior Summer Showcase. Should be an impact freshman for Wisconsin. And then Quinn Finley coming in after a pretty strong USHL career where he won some championships and had an opportunity to play late into the season there and play in high leverage situations. That's a good group to have. I like Notre Dame's recruiting class as well. Danny Nelson, Cole Knuble up front, 2 guys I think should be instant impact players. And then, on the back end, they've got Paul Fisher, who is, a stout defenseman. He's a Notre Dame style player, was a big piece of that under-18 team at the World Under-18s last year. And then, he has some more skill and some gritty guys. You got Carter Slager coming in to bring some of that grit factor. You got Maddox Fleming, who has skill and scoring ability. Pretty good there. And then out west, just to show a little respect to them as well, Colorado College and Denver are 2 teams that I think, while they don't have incredibly deep or dynamic classes, they have kind of solved a lot of their to complement what they already had. So I think CC is a program on the rise. Denver is obviously always a perennial contender, and we'll kind of see there. I think for Denver, they'll also have a very intriguing draft prospect in Zeev Buyam, who is a dynamic offensive defenseman and kind of fits into that same mold of guys that they've had at Denver over the years, guys like Will Butcher and Michael Benning and different players like that have been pretty important players for them. They have one right now in Sean Barons as well. So keep an eye on that. Their blue line is going to have some really nice young pieces. Garrett Brown, Winnipeg Jets prospect, Boston Buckberger, who had a really strong season in the USHL. So those are just some to mention. We'll definitely be diving in before the college season gets going, and we will talk more about these recruiting classes. But I am so excited about this freshman class. Obviously watching Celebrini and Lev Shunov in their draft seasons. Zeev Buyum is going to be in his draft season. A lot of guys that were recent first-round draft picks. There's so much excitement about this college hockey season. I feel like it's a very wide-open race as well to the national championship. Will it be a team that has a more senior group? Will it be a team that has, the dynamic freshman class? You never really know, and that's what makes college hockey so fun. All right. We're going to get to questions and answers in just a second, but before we do that, I did want to talk a little bit more about something we mentioned last week. If you are familiar with amateur hockey at all, in any way, you have almost certainly watched games on Hockey TV. Well, as you may have heard, Hockey TV is now part of FloHockey, and FloHockey is where you will now find all of the great games that you were watching on Hockey TV previously, with a few exceptions of different partners and things like that. But we're talking ECHL and USHL, which you already had on FloHockey, CCHA, Atlantic Hockey, the College Hockey America. We're going to have more this year. And so if you are a FloHockey subscriber, or if you aren't yet, if you already are, your subscription just got a heck of a lot more valuable. If you're not a subscriber yet, there is a great reason to sign up. We've got all those leagues I mentioned, but we also have a wide array of junior hockey. So in addition now to the USHL, you'll also find the BCHL, the entire CJHL, so things like the leagues like the AJHL, the OJHL, MHL. There are a lot of junior leagues across the North America, which you will now find here. The USPHL, NCDC, Elite, Premier. We've got all of that as well. And then we've also got a wide array of minor hockey, Hockey Alberta, leagues in Quebec, leagues in Ontario. We've got it, so much stuff. There's more than you could ever possibly have time to watch. But that just goes to show you the commitment that Flow Sports has made to the sport of hockey. They were smart when they said, we want to be partnered and have a piece of Hockey Tech and Hockey TV. They bring that over, and now we have one of the most diverse groups of leagues and rights anywhere in the hockey landscape. We also, if you go on to flowhockey.tv right now, you're going to see a new navigation bar, which is going to allow you to go through leagues and see the data and see the games and see the highlights and see the news about those leagues drilled down. So make sure you click around up there, find the league that you're most passionate about, find out all the different things that you can get just on FloHockey alone. We want to be the essential destination for hockey beneath the NHL. We feel like we're doing it. We're going to have great draft coverage this year. We're going to have great college hockey coverage this year, unrivaled junior hockey coverage. We're going to have it all for you on flowhockey.tv. If it's in the sport, if it's happening, if it's beneath the NHL, if it's related to the NHL in terms of prospects, we are going to have something for you. So make sure you check it out. And if you have not yet switched over, if you were a Hockey TV subscriber and you have not yet claimed your FloHockey account, make sure you do that. You can still go to Hockey TV to get that link and claim your account. And if you continue to have issues, you can always reach out to Flow Sports customer support or your Hockey TV customer support as well. And that's great. We've got a great group. Really excited to be working with the people that were, Hockey Tech, and it is now all Flow Sports. Really excited about it. So make sure you are signed in, signed up. We have so much stuff for the rest of the season. Cannot wait. I think the annual subscription is the way to go with all the hockey you're going to have available. I spend a lot of my weekends just skipping around different games. It's very easy to do that on our apps, on Roku, on Fire TV, and on the various smart apps. So make sure you get to that. All right. Whew. There's a lot to get to. I'm really excited about the season, as you can probably tell. There's just a lot going on, and it's been a little bit crazy around here as we get ready to bring you some of these leagues. But We're going to talk and continue this theme of NCAA, and then we're going to move into the 2024 NHL Draft as we do every single episode. We will have draft questions every time because from now until June, we want to make sure that you are absolutely ready for the NHL Draft. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But we're going to start with NCAA questions, men's hockey questions, and this one comes to us from Scott, who asks, obviously the past 2 years at Wisconsin have been dismal. What classifies as a good year for Mike Hastings in his first year as the Badgers head coach? Well, I'm going to be very interested to hear in the end what Mike Hastings feels is success for him. This is a guy who has not had a losing season as a head coach ever. I mean, it's crazy to think that, but you look at 20 plus years of coaching and never a losing season. So I'm guessing for Mike Hastings, it can't be a losing season. But I think if you're a Wisconsin Badgers fan, you want more than that. So what is a successful season for the Wisconsin Badgers this year? I think the very first thing is that it is reestablished as a destination for top-tier talent. I don't think that reputation ever went away, but I do think that it was getting harder for them to secure the elite players in recruiting. That isn't going to be as big of a problem, I don't think, under Mike Hastings. And I think part of it is because even though he's coming from Minnesota State, where they recruited a different kind of athlete to play for Minnesota State, they typically would go older players. And I think you're going to see a hybrid now that he's at Wisconsin, because you can't go all in one way or all in the other way. And especially not when you're at Wisconsin, when you can attract elite level players. I think his track record of development is probably one of the biggest selling points here. And also the track record of winning. I think that really speaks to the team. It's going to speak to players. If they want to compete for national championships, if they want to compete at the highest level, they can do it with Mike Hastings. This is a guy that has experience as a head coach for many years. He's done it at the collegiate level, and he's done it with fewer resources than he's going to have at Wisconsin, which creates an interesting challenge. I also think that they made some significant additions through the transfer portal, through guys that he already knew, bringing in players from his team. Bringing players from his team. Especially like a guy like Christian Fitzgerald and others. That is going to make them instantly better. Those guys aren't going to have a lot of learning curve with Mike Hastings. I think bringing more out of Charlie Stramel. His freshman season was, by his own standards, I think disappointing in terms of his ability to produce and everything else that he was able to impact the game. I think a guy like Mike Hastings is going to get all of the best parts of Charlie Stramel's game out of him again. It's continuing to bring along this freshman class and to make these guys these 2 to 3 to 4 year players that are going to be foundational pieces for this program going forward. So this is a building year, but I still think it's a year where they can be competitive. Can they win the Big Ten? I don't necessarily think so, but I do think it's wide open this year. I mean, I think Minnesota has had some significant losses. Michigan suffered some significant losses to their team. Michigan State is a team on the rise. Ohio State is going to be, they lost some of their most critical players from last year's team. So there are a number of things that are going to change. So I do think that Wisconsin has the ability to compete right away. But I think being in the top half of the Big Ten is both realistic and maybe should happen. I think the coaching change should help. It's going to probably be reliant on goaltending. But I do think that the Wisconsin Badgers are poised for a much better season this year, and they're going to be on a different path. I think that, with all the enthusiasm that came in when Tony Granato started, and I think you also have to appreciate the grace with which he has handled this situation. He clearly loves the University of Wisconsin, and I'm sure it hurts a lot to not be involved anymore. But he's provided, support and kind words, and for Hastings, for the players that are there, he wants to see them succeed. But I think that over these last couple of years, you started to lose what is the vision of the program, what is the direction of the program. Mike Hastings is going to reestablish that direction, I think, in year one, and that's going to be what ultimately defines success. Did they get themselves on that path going forward? So, great question. Hard to, and probably a too long answer, but I am absolutely excited to see what happens at Wisconsin this year. And by the way, Big Ten, could you get a schedule out yet? We'd love to see one. We have not seen a conference schedule yet. It's August 23rd as I record this. So let's chop. Maybe it's out by the time I publish this, and then I'll feel bad. Anyway, we're going to move on to our next question. This is a bit of a general NCAA question, and a good one from Avco Cup. Why are there no NCAA hockey programs in the Pacific Northwest? Great question, especially since, we thought there may have been a gap, that existed. We already knew that the gap existed, but there were teams, and there are teams in Alaska. You can watch the Alaska Fairbanks Nanooks on FloHockey, and you got Alaska Anchorage out there as well. Obviously, those are, for lack of a better term, on an island. Alaska itself not an island, but on an island with the situation that they're in, being so far away from everything. But I also think that it's important to note the progression of college hockey. It really started as an Eastern sport, early on in the very early stages of college hockey. The Ivies started. We talked about Cornell and Yale being among the first programs that got started, and it continually moved westward. And obviously, I think Upper Peninsula of Michigan became a hot spot for the early days of college hockey, and also the early days of American professional hockey. And Minnesota obviously became more involved. But you have to think, even Minnesota, we didn't have Minnesota State for many years. We didn't have St. Cloud State for many years. Herb Brooks was essentially the godfather of St. Cloud State and spearheaded the growth of college hockey in Minnesota. Now we have St. Thomas as a Division I school. We're starting to move into South Dakota with Augustana. They're having their first season this year. So there is growth that has happened, but it's happened very gradually. Colorado College and Denver also were two of the very early programs that played in the early days of college hockey and have had programs for years and years. But I think that it's hard to understand where hockey grew. But you also have to look at the NHL as well. They didn't have a Pacific Northwest presence beyond the Vancouver Canucks for many years. Now they have the Seattle Kraken. They have more teams in California. Hockey just was. I think that the westward expansion of the NHL is what has helped grow hockey throughout the United States. But college hockey has still been smaller. And you also look at where these players are coming from. You don't see many players locally in Seattle that would be, like a recruiting base for UW, for them to be able to, form a program, or for Oregon to form a program. So that's part of the reason. I just think that the sport continues to be regionalized. And it's funny, we always used to talk about the West Coast of college hockey, basically just beyond the Mississippi River. But we continue to expand westward, Lindenwood in Missouri, as I mentioned, Augustana. Arizona State has been a huge boon. And now the other issue is that with that challenge, travel is very expensive, scholarships are very expensive. Hockey is a hugely expensive sport. It can operate at a profit, as it does at several institutions, but it is a big risk for those programs to take on. But who knows, with the way college sports are going bonkers right now, maybe we'll see more westward expansion. All right, let me get a sip of water so I don't cough all over you guys again here as we go into our next question. All right, next question comes from Penguin7. And this is a good one because we've got a wide open field for this question. Who do you like as the top NCAA goalie this coming season? Good question, and I think we'll there's a number of answers. I think Victor Osman at the University of Maine was a guy that a lot of NHL teams were very interested in as a potential college free agent. I think he was one of the more sought after goalies on the college free agent market because a lot of the top collegiate goalies last year were drafted players. Osman was a guy that had a lot of interest. He opted to return to Maine, I think partially because he believes that they're going to be more competitive this year. And they very well may be. But I think he's got a chance to be one of the top tier guys. We're going to see once again Blake Pietila, who has been it feels like he's been in college hockey forever, but that's also because there was another Blake Pietila that played at Michigan Tech. This is a different one. But Blake, he was one of the top goalies in college hockey last season. I think the end of his season, the numbers went down a little bit, but he was up there with the likes of Yaniv Peretz and Devin Levi in terms of numbers last season. So I do think that those are a couple of the guys. But I'm also going to be looking at the freshmen as well. We're going to be looking at Michael Harabel. We're going to be looking at Trey Augustine. We're going to be looking at Jacob Fowler. I think all of those guys have a chance to be instant impact guys and the schools that they're playing at. It's often that it'll be a more senior player for college hockey. But I mean, there's going to be a number of really good goaltenders in there. Providence will have Phillips Fedeback back as well. A guy that is a drafted player. He's young. He's got an opportunity to really have a strong season. They got a good team in front of them. We saw Caden Mbarico really burst onto the scene for Colorado College last year. How much of can he repeat that? And then you've got Justin Close at the University of Minnesota as well, who I believe will be back for his fifth year. So having a Justin Close come in and take that next step of taking a team to a national championship final. Having him back is going to be huge for Minnesota. And you think, yes, he's back for a fifth season, but he's really only been a starter for one full season. He kind of took the reins late in his junior year, and now he's got a chance to have a second consecutive full starting season. So Justin Close is another guy that you should be keeping an eye on, in addition to the other ones that I mentioned. So really excited to see where things end up with some of these players and how they ultimately perform. But, there are some really good young goalies in the NCAA. But keep an eye on Osman as well, because I do think that he is going to continue to be a significant piece in the college free agency market, especially if he has a good season. All right, moving on. We got another one from Maxwell here, and Maxwell asks, is Artem Levshunov going to struggle a bit transitioning to college hockey? Good question. I think anytime you have a younger defenseman and a guy that wasn't necessarily on the college path to begin with come in, you would ultimately have some questions about how that would transition. What gives me reason to believe that he should transition quite well is that he made a seamless transition to the USHL. It did not take him long to become one of the best defensemen in that league, despite being, not in his draft season yet. And, ultimately, this is a player that had previously been on the path to go to the Canadian Hockey League. They barred Russian and Belarusian players from being selected in the import draft, so there was no path for him to get in to the CHL. Goes to the USHL, adjusts to America, figures out how to drive, gets going and just learns the language. And he manages to, do well enough and gets himself into Michigan State University through however means. And he did that all while basically being one of the top defensemen in the USHL last year. And you look at his ability to produce, you look at his skill level, you look at his mobility, you look at his size, all of those things, physical maturity for him is not going to be a problem like it can be for some freshman defensemen. Awareness is not a problem for him. Mobility is not a problem for him. The pace of the game should not be a problem for him. He's got high-end hockey sense. He's got great tools. So it's possible that he could struggle in transition. Maybe an additional year in the USHL ultimately would have helped him, but that is one player that I'm not concerned about in the transition. I think he will continue to be a top tier draft prospect based on what he does at Michigan State. All right. This one is kind of college hockey USHL related because it allows us to kind of talk about something that the USHL has been doing really well lately. And of course, you can always watch USHL games on FloHockey, and really looking forward to getting out to the Fall Classic later this month, or excuse me, in September. So this one comes from Random Task 68. Question for the next pod. Are there other teams at the same recruiting level in the USHL, not the NTDP, as the Chicago Steel, or are they sort of a monolith? Thinking of how Power, Fantilli, Celebrini all went to the Steel. Well, that's a really, it's a really interesting question because I think for a period of time, Chicago definitely had the market cornered on elite players. Their benefit was, I think that you have to give Larry Robbins a lot of credit for the amount of money that he put into that team. They did some things with development. They had Ryan Hardy, who's now with the Toronto Maple Leafs, came in there and kind of revolutionized how they were doing business as a team and how they were doing hockey operations. And it allowed them to recruit high level players. It allowed them to identify players. And Hardy did come from the National Team Development Program, was the director of player personnel there. Then he went to the Boston Bruins and was a scout there. And then he came back to the Chicago Steel to be their GM, which was an interesting move at the time. A lot of those guys want to go to the NHL and stay there. So you got to give Hardy a lot of credit for taking that step back, but to take on a leadership role within an organization. Now, he's allowed, he essentially runs the AHL operations for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, I think that helped a lot. And then you have to the thing is that one player can make a big difference. And Owen Power was probably the difference making player for the Chicago Steel. When he made the decision, and Owen Power was a player that had basically decided very early on that he always wanted to go to school. So he made that choice, and it was up to him whether he wanted to stay in Canada or try something else. And the Chicago Steel offered him an opportunity at a very young age to come into the league and to play as a rookie, to have an additional season before it was his draft year, and then go into the University of Michigan prepared. And he developed at a high level. I think the Steel invested in, they had skills coaches and skating coaches, and they had kind of started to put more money into the player development side, and that ultimately translated in more players wanting to play there. Owen Power and Adam Fantilli, just so happens, both of them are also, CAA clients. You have that experience that comes in with, once one player does, and then they have an advisee who's, thinking about or wants to work with them, then they see it. And Adam Fantilli's path, all these players' paths were a little bit different. Macklin Celebrini was another player that went to Shattuck St. Mary's, kind of got the taste of, he played a little bit in Canada and the U.S. His dad, was working for the Golden State Warriors, and so he was playing youth hockey in San Jose, goes to Shattuck St. Mary's, and then he gets this opportunity. So that's just, and I know this is a long preamble and not answering the question yet, but I promise I'm going to get there. But this is where things started to change for the USHL, and this is where more teams, when teams, you can either complain about how they're doing things or how they're getting players or whatever else, or you can try and get better. I think one team that is starting to really do that, and one team that has done that, is the Youngstown Phantoms. They've been very aggressive on their tenders. They've been and tenders are when, you sign a player, essentially. One thing that the USHL has done that I think has significantly allowed them to bring in players that are on a player development path towards the NHL. I do think that is, they having the tender process where the player has a little bit more control. There is a draft, but the USHL allows teams to use tenders to sign players before the draft and essentially use that as their first 2 draft picks. And in doing that, they put a little bit more power into the player to make a choice. And then they also allow the teams the opportunity to give these players an early feel for the league. They don't have to wait and see who's going to draft them. They're going to have these conversations. They're actually going to get recruited, and they're going to play. So this year we're going to have Zachary Morin and Sasha Boumediene playing for Youngstown, who are both tender signings from last season. And those are guys that they're very highly regarded. Morin just committed to Boston University, so a significant ad for them in their recruiting class for a couple of years from now. But, you look at what Youngstown has done. They put similar focus into development. They have multiple people in multiple positions that have allowed them to, improve in those areas. They've also, now have proof in the pudding of winning this Clark Cup last year, their first time ever. And so that helps attract players. And so when you are investing in development, when you're investing in coaching, when you're investing in making players better, and now have proof positive, like the Chicago Steel did for those number of years, and now that Youngstown has, And they're not alone. I mean, you think back to Andrei Svechnikov signing a tender with Muskegon. Fargo has had some really good success. Omaha, all these, every team has had, some player that has gone on to have a significant NHL career. Not all of them have come through the tender process, and not all tenders work out as well as Power, Fantilli, and Celebrini. But I would say that there are teams that are now, Chicago is probably still the gold standard, but I'm not going to say that there are other teams that can't do what they're doing, because I think we're starting to see those teams dig in and try to do it. I also think that the National Team Development Program's presence in the USHL has created that level of competition to get those high-level players. And it'll be interesting to see. I think players will they eventually make a decision when should I go to the NTDP or should I go to a different USHL team? There are going to be a lot of different viewpoints of what that could be. I think most players will still go to the NTDP, but USHL teams are offering a great opportunity. And so I have a lot of respect for what they've done with their tender process. All right, we are going to run through some 2024 NHL draft questions, and we're going to run through them quick. So let's get to it right now. And this one comes from Dan. He actually asked this last week. He thankfully asked it again so that I can remember. And Dan, what a question. Who has the juice, #juice, to challenge Celebrini for number one? Well, I still think that, Max Celebrini, based on what I've seen and based on what I've seen from the other players, I still do think that he is a far and away the number one guy for this year. I think he's the most well-rounded player. I think he's got the best hockey sense. He's among the most skilled. The question is going to be ultimately, is anybody going to be able to catch that? I think Cole Yzerman is a dynamic goal scorer. I don't think he has as many elements in his game as Celebrini. The defensemen in this class, which we have a question about strength of positions. I think there's a number of guys, including Artem Levshunov, who are going to, create some conversation about how high some of these defensemen should go. But, I think a lot of people are looking very early on at the early stages and seeing what Ivan Demidov has done in KHL preseason. And we're like, oh boy, here we go. Now, I've heard and seen a lot of the things about, well, maybe is he better than Michkov? He's a different player, I think. I don't think that there's a lot of similarities between the two. I think Demidov is physically stronger. He has a little bit more will, to get to the interior. But I mean, Michkov is a genius level hockey player. That's the separating factor for me. And Demidov has great hockey sense, but I don't think he has genius level hockey sense like Michkov does. But that is a guy that I really do think is going to make us talk throughout the season. And Celebrini, as we mentioned, could start on the shelf injured. And depending on how late his season begins, it allows those guys more time to build cases for themselves in the hype machine. And then we see where it goes from there. But I think, at this point, Demidov, Yzerman, Berkeley Catton had a really great Holinka Gretzky Cup. Those are players that are going to be in that conversation. But it's still early to say. If we're going based on what we've seen so far in the preseason, you got to say Demidov is really in the hunt there. All right. Speaking of the 2024 draft and the positions of strength or weakness, 604 Adam asks, what positions look to be strong and weak for the 2024 NHL draft? I know it's early. It is early. We're still sorting through it. I mean, I would say at this point, I have not yet seen a goaltender of significant repute emerge. I think that there are certainly some really top quality forwards, some really good centers. I think there's probably quite a few guys that will factor in more on the wing. I think if you'll notice, just like last season, a number of the top end players are sub 6 foot forwards. Even Celebrini still is about 5'11", might be 6 foot now. We'll see what he measures in at BU. But he's a player who, I don't think the size really ever matters that much with him. Sidney Crosby, 5'11" in his draft year. It's just there's plenty of examples of players where sub 6 foot guys can be significant impact players. But I do think that this year, when we look at last year's draft, I didn't love the defense class. We still saw two defensemen go in the top 6 picks with Reinbacher and Shimashev. But this year, I think defensemen are going to be a significant factor. We already talked about Artem Levshunov. You look at Sam Dickinson. You look at Some of the other players are Aaron Kiviharyu, who's, we'll see ultimately where he winds up. I think that those are players that are all going to be significant factors. And Henry Muse is a player that I really like a lot, that had a really strong Holinka Gretzky Cup, playing for the Ottawa 67s this year. Like, I think there's going to be a good run on defensemen early in this draft, and there's going to be a premium put on those players. That's the initial look, but again, let's let the year play out, and we'll go from there. All right. The Gargoyle asks for thoughts on Brandsteg Nygaard and whether he could enter the conversation of the top tier forwards in this draft: Yzerman, Demidov, Celebrini, Catton. Good question. The thing that makes Brandsteg Nygaard interesting is, of course, that he is Norwegian. And so Michael Brandsteg Nygaard is a Norwegian-born player. He's about 6'1", close to 200 pounds. He is an competitive guy. I mean, he plays hard, and he plays strong, and I think that's really good. He got 11 games of professional hockey last year, playing for Mora in Sweden. So in the Allsvenskan, the second tier pro division, he at 11 games had 3 points, 38 points in the U20 ranks at 35 games played. He also played in the under 18 ranks and completely dominated the U18 ranks in Sweden. Probably comparable to what you see with a lot of the high performance hockey and AAA hockey in the United States. So, that's not necessarily a level that we're going to grade significantly on. If you've watched any of the preseason and the clips, and I've only seen clips of preseason games, I have not dug in on a ton of video on Brandsteg Nygaard yet. But he is absolutely a guy that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on. I love the way that he competes. I think that he has skill. I think there's a number of things that as he gets stronger, he's going to be even better at. But he is a handful to play against. We'll see how much he plays pro versus how he plays U20. The more he plays pro, especially in the Allsvenskan, and if he has success there, I think the more likely it is that he can get into that conversation. I don't have enough yet. I don't have enough data yet, and it's certainly early to say that I feel like very strongly that he's in the mix with the guys that you mentioned. But based on the little bit that we've seen so far, based on the fact that he did play, in the Division 1A U20s last year and was a point per game player there, there's a lot of little factors that we're going to be continuing to watch for him. And then when you see a player, of Norwegian descent, non-traditional in terms of top tier talent, it gets a little exciting. And so we'll have to wait and see. But I do think that's a name that we're going to be talking a lot about throughout this draft season. Still need to see a lot more before I put him in that next tier of guys. And now we've got another question on one of the other European players. And this one comes from Dana. And Dana asks, do you think Tiltelbach, who's playing for the Czechs and Vancouver, is a first round candidate? So if you wanted to go off of the Holinka Gretzky Cup, I think a lot of people were really excited about what he did. The issue is with Tiltelbach is that he's not a very big player. He has skill. He had 8 points at the Holinka Gretzky Cup, including 5 goals for a very good Czech team. He was outstanding at last year's Under-17 Hockey Challenge as well. He's done all the things that you need to do to stand out. Going to the Vancouver Giants this year, I do think is probably a significantly strong decision for his future, for his draft stock. Playing in North America and playing at the junior level where he should be able to produce, we're going to get to see the full complement of his skill set. We've seen enough players that have played in the Czech pro leagues that, especially guys at his size, where it's really hard for them to produce. So he comes over here, excuse me, and that gives him an opportunity to be a quality talent at the WHL level. So, I think that we'll have to kind of wait and see. I think it's a little early to say, yeah, he's for sure a first rounder. I like the player a lot. He's going to be a player that I'm tracking very closely this year. But at his size, and certainly, as he makes the transition to North America, there's going to be a lot of things that we need to see from him in order to put him into that first round category decisively. I don't think there are a lot of guys, you look at my early draft rankings from previous years, and there is so much change from that to the one at the end of the season. So to answer the question simply, yes, he has a chance to be in that mix. I think the skill level and what he's done at high level competitions suggests that. Whether or not he's going to have to show a lot this season. Is the skating going to be there? Is the skill good and dynamic enough? And is there a way that he can play this size? I do think he can. It's just going to be up to him to prove that this year playing for Vancouver. But very fascinated to watch that player. And certainly after a strong Hlinka Gretzky, you hope for the best for him. All right. Our last question is our by far most serious and alarming question to answer. And I have to tread carefully here because, as you guys probably know, I live in the great state of Iowa. Originally from Illinois, but I live in the great state of Iowa. And if there's one thing that Iowans are very passionate about, it's this next question from Ryan Kennedy. And Ryan, of course, of the Hockey News, one of the great guys in the game, and certainly a guy I enjoy speaking with. And so I will speak candidly on this topic for you, Ryan. Iowa breakfast pizza, worth it? Oh, Ryan, worth it. I mean, yes, simply, let's get that right out of the way. How many of you guys know about breakfast pizza? And I'm asking that rhetorically because it's just me speaking to a camera and microphone right now, and I can't hear any response. But if you've never tried it, come on through Iowa. You stop at a Casey's General Store, or you stop at a local place that has breakfast pizza, and you get the breakfast pizza. You get eggs on it. You get your cheese. You get your cheese sauce on there. And then I would say, I'm probably a bacon guy over a sausage. I like them both, but I think bacon, a little bit of different flavor. I think sausage gets a little bit too much like regular pizza. We got the egg on it. I mean, you got the crust. You got it. It is probably, it's also very easy. It's portable. You can eat it in the car if you want to. It's nice and warm. They sell it by the slice. I mean, quite frankly, I mean, yes, it's worth it. I probably could have just said that and be done with it, but this is something that I think people really need to understand. Breakfast pizza, and I don't care who you are, you love pizza already. Well, do you also like breakfast? Yeah. Okay. You combine those two loves and you have magic. That's all I have to say about that. Thank you for your question, Ryan. And definitely try a breakfast pizza. I may try one tomorrow after I drop the kids off at school. Now you put that thought in my head. Been trying to eat healthier. It's not going well. But anyway, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Talking Hockey Sense. Really appreciate you all joining me. It has been a lot of fun. We are not going to be back next week, but we will be back after that. We'll start going into more of the preseason of junior hockey. We'll talk a little bit more about the other things that you'll be able to find on FloHockey this year. And certainly we'll talk more college hockey in 2024 NHL Draft. As a reminder, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the podcast in your audio apps of choice. Watch us on YouTube. Watch us on FloHockey.tv. Leave a kind rating and review on your app of choice as well. Help us get the word out about this podcast as we continue to evolve and grow as our hockey offerings grow here over at FloHockey. And once again, if you haven't yet, make sure you are signed up for a FloHockey subscription, because this year you are going to have more than you could ever want from a hockey offering, and really can't wait to bring that to you this season. So a lot of fun things ahead. We will take a break next week, but we'll see you the week after that right here on Talking Hockey Sense. My name is Chris Peters. We'll catch you next time.